Good evening, everyone, and welcome back to Empty Cloud Monastery. So this evening, instead of your usual Wednesday evening teacher, Ayurvamavara, I'll be giving a talk this evening. So we can start with just a few short minutes of meditation. So you can go ahead and get in an upright sitting position and close your eyes. Just take a few long, slow, deep breaths. Just feeling your whole body and letting the body relax with each breath. And bringing the mind to stillness within the body. Letting the mind rest silent and still in the middle of the body. And with the mind silent and still, clearly feel the whole body all at once. Without judgment, just complete appreciation, enjoyment, contentment with this steady, peaceful awareness of the body. So feeling the whole body as a single object, a single domain of sensation. Feeling the body as clearly and intensely as possible. And take another deep breath. Let it out slowly. And open your eyes. So at this time we can pay homage to the Buddha. And then I'll give a talk about Dhamma. And we'll answer any questions that you might have. So you're always welcome to type in questions at any time, and I'll answer them at the end of the talk. So we can start by bringing our hands together in Anjali, and I'll recite the homage to the Buddha. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang dhammang sanghang namasami. So here at the monastery, last Sunday we had a Vassa ceremony. So this is a ceremony for beginning the Vassa. And we also combine this with Asalha Puja. So Asalha Puja is the day, which is usually the full moon in July, when we commemorate the teaching of the Dhammacakkappavattana Sutta. So the discourse which we consider to be the first formal recorded discourse of the Buddha, the first formal teaching of the Buddha. And the day after Asalha Puja is the first day of the Vassa, the 3-month retreat period which Buddhist monks participate in, usually every year, unless there's a very good reason not to. But the vast majority of Buddhist monks, especially in the Theravada tradition, follow this custom, this Vinaya custom of a 3-month retreat during the, usually begins mid-July and goes for 3 months until mid-October. So again, it's the beginning of the Vassa, the time when monks commit to staying in one place for 3 months. And the ceremony of beginning the Vassa, so Vassa Aradhana, it's traditionally a time when the lay people invite the bhikkhus and bhikkhunis to stay here, to stay close to where the lay people live, so that the lay people can support the monks during the Vassa time, support them for 3 months, and also have the opportunity to come to Dhamma talks and practice meditation together with the monks. So practicing dana, so the practice of generosity, and of course dana in Buddhism, we put a lot of importance on giving to the monastic community, but it's also very important to also practice generosity to everybody else as well. So practicing dana through supporting the monks during the Vassa time. Practicing sila, so coming to the monastery and taking the 5 precepts, refreshing one's commitment to following the 5 precepts. Cultivating samadhi, so developing one's meditation practice, so coming to the monastery or wherever the monks are living to study meditation and practice meditation together with the monks. And also cultivating wisdom. So listening to Dhamma talks, asking questions, discussing the Dhamma with the monks. This also is a way that we develop wisdom. It's a way that we develop the necessary intellectual understanding that forms the foundation for a deeper experiential understanding of the Buddha's teachings. So the Vassa ceremony, in most Buddhist monasteries, it's more of a formality. In that one knows that the bhikkhus and bhikkhunis are probably going to stay in that monastery anyway. So the ceremony of inviting them to stay for the Vassa is in fact ceremony. It's something which we do as a reminder of the importance of Vassa, a reminder of the value of having bhikkhus and bhikkhunis living in your area. But with wandering monks, this actually is a real matter of importance. So wandering monks going from place to place, if they come to a place where the lay people are very happy to support them and very happy to learn and study the Dhamma, and the lay people invite the monks to spend the Vassa there, then that's actually a very meaningful thing. It's very meaningful when the lay community expresses a genuine, heartfelt wish for the monastic community to stay close by. It indicates that these are people who are genuinely interested in learning the Dhamma, genuinely interested in practicing the Dhamma, and these are lay people who understand the importance of the monastic Sangha. So this is something which is not to be overlooked. So the practice of, again, inviting the bhikkhus and bhikkhunis to spend Vassa close to where one lives, this is something which is not to be swept aside lightly, because it indicates that one has a deep appreciation for the value of Buddha, Dhamma, and Sangha, and a recognition of the intertwining of these three. So we all appreciate the Buddha, otherwise we wouldn't be practicing Buddhism. So we all appreciate the Buddha. So how do we appreciate the Buddha? We appreciate the Buddha through understanding the Dhamma, through practicing the Dhamma. And how do we understand and practice the Dhamma? It's through drawing close to the Sangha. And if we genuinely appreciate the Dhamma, then we also appreciate the Sangha. We appreciate the community of bhikkhus and bhikkhunis who are committed to living the Dhamma, to embodying the teachings of the Buddha as fully and completely as possible. So for the Buddhist community, so the community of both monks and lay people, so bhikkhus and bhikkhunis, as well as lay people, it's a reminder. The beginning of Vassa is a reminder of the importance of caring about each other, of supporting each other, of nourishing each other, of uplifting each other. It's a reminder that it actually is a genuine blessing to have bhikkhus and bhikkhunis living close by. It's a blessing to have them staying in one place for a period of several months. So the rest of the year, it's common for Buddhist monks to travel, to go around visiting different places, to accept teaching invitations. So for example, Sensaya Soma is a Dhamma teacher who speaks Italian fluently as a native speaker. We get a lot of invitations from Italy for her to teach Dhamma in Italy. So if you want her to stay in America rather than in Italy, it's important to invite her to spend Vassa in America. Otherwise, people might invite her to spend Vassa in Italy, and that might be what happens next. And again, the rest of the year, we're free to travel as much as we like. So the Vinaya rules don't place any limits on traveling for the other 9 months of the year. But during the 3 months of Vassa, we commit to staying in one place. So if you like having Buddhist monks around, invite them to spend Vassa where you live. This is actually a really powerful way to initiate a deep connection to the Sangha. If you already have monks living close by you, make sure to re-invite them every Vassa. Otherwise, they might go somewhere else. And if you don't have any Buddhist monks who live near you, start contacting them and inviting them to come for Vassa. So it's a little late for this year, but you can invite them to spend Vassa near where you live next year. And the invitation to Vassa also comes with it the commitment to support the Sangha for the entire Vassa, either to personally provide their needs or to make sure that there are enough people who are willing to look after them, that everyone can join together in supporting the Sangha. And this also emphasizes another important element of the Buddha's teachings, which is the concept of interdependence or mutual support. So no one exists as an individual. Rather, reality is composed of a constantly changing set of interlocking and interrelated conditions. And none of these conditions can be defined apart from all the other conditions. So what is a Buddhist monk? Well, in order to define that, you need to define what a Buddhist is and what a monk is. And to do that, you need to define all the words that you're using to define Buddhist and all the words that you use to define monk. And eventually you wind up roping in the entire English language, as well as a bunch of Pali words and a bunch of concepts of Dhamma. And you wind up then with this massive interrelated web of ideas. And ultimately, one eventually winds up talking about awakening. One eventually winds up talking about Nibbāna, talking about what is beyond the conditioned world, what there is other than conditional phenomena. So we talk about the interdependence of all things, the interrelatedness of all things. And this applies equally to the Dhamma. So all the Dhammas are also interrelated. So all the teachings of the Buddha are connected to each other. And all of them are ultimately connected to the final goal of practice. They're ultimately connected to Nibbāna, to complete awakening, to full enlightenment, to the perfection of wisdom and compassion, the complete freedom from suffering. And this is very important. So there is no discussion of Buddhism which can leave out awakening. There is no discussion of Buddhism which can leave out Nibbāna. There is no discussion of Buddhism which can be had without speaking about the final goal. And this is because it's actually right in the word. It's right in the word Buddhism. Buddhism is the practice of awakening. It's quite simply exactly what it is. And awakening to what? Awakening to Nibbāna, awakening to the absolute, awakening to the unconditioned element, which pervades all things, which underlies all things. So it's really necessary when talking about Buddhism that we constantly remind ourselves that although Buddhist practice does lead to greater peace and happiness in our daily life, its ultimate goal is something far more sublime, something far more peaceful, far more profound, far more transcendent. So it's very easy to get caught up on the surface of things. It's like, oh, well, we go to the temple once a week to offer some food and do some chanting and bow to the monks. It's like, well, okay, yeah, that's good. Why do you do that? Oh, it makes us happy. It makes good karma for better conditions in future lives. It's like, well, okay, yeah, it does do that. And so what else? Is that it? Or is there more? Or other people, they don't go to offer food necessarily, but they like to go to help out with the work projects. So they show up early on Sunday morning with their work gloves, and they're like, okay, what can I do? Do you need me to plant some trees? Do you need me to move some heavy objects? Do you need me to pull weeds? How can I help? And again, well, why? Why do these things? What's the point? Maybe you just like helping people out. That's fine. It makes you happy to help people out. That's good. Maybe you particularly like helping out at the monastery because the monastery is a peaceful place with really nice people. That's like, okay, yeah, sure. And What else? What's the ultimate reason for these things? Or maybe you're not so much into offering food, or you're not so much into chanting, and you're not so much into helping out, but you like to come for meditation programs. You like to come and do sitting meditation and walking meditation and standing meditation, learning about different ways of practicing meditation, mindfulness of the body, mindfulness of breathing, loving kindness, perception of impermanence, and so on. So all these interesting ways of training the mind. And why? Makes you a little bit calmer, a little bit happier. Oh, okay. Yeah. And what else? What's beyond that? Or maybe you like all of these things. You like offering food, and you like helping with the work, and you like the chanting, you like the meditation. And why? What's the purpose? What's the point? If it was just to be a little bit happier, well, there's lots of ways to be a little bit happier. I remember many years ago, I was talking to a person who was not Buddhist, and in fact, not remotely interested in Buddhism. And actually, he was saying that he didn't really understand why people bother to meditate. He's like, if I want to be a little bit calmer and happier, I'll just go for a run. Because when I go running, I feel better and my mind gets more peaceful. It's like, well, okay, yeah, if that's all that Buddhism was for, if it was just for being a little bit happier and a little bit calmer, then yeah, you're right. You're right. Probably better just to do some exercise, or maybe eat some nice food, or maybe take some pills or something. Yeah, there's lots of ways to be a little bit happier, a little bit calmer. But in Buddhism, our ultimate goal is awakening. It's awakening to absolute reality. It's dropping all of the defilements and delusions of the mind so that we can clearly see reality as it actually is. It's cultivating the perfection of wisdom and compassion. It's cultivating this broad, vast, open heart, which genuinely wishes for everyone to be happy, without exception. It's cultivating this clear knowing of exactly what we're doing with our mind, this clear knowing of exactly which activities bring benefit and which bring harm. It's cultivating this clear knowing of the fundamental nature of all phenomena. And the fundamental nature of all phenomena is that they're impermanent, unsatisfying, impersonal, and ultimately absent of any substantial, solid reality. So yeah, it feels great. It feels great to give food to the monks. It feels great to help out with volunteer projects. It feels great to do some chanting. It feels great to do some meditation. But if Buddhism was just about feeling great, well, again, I would say there's much easier ways. There's other ways. There's lots of ways to feel good. There's lots of ways to bring a bit more pleasure into your life. But that's not why we practice. Or even if you're saying, well, I'm practicing in order to cultivate good karma for future lives. It's like, well, okay, fair enough. And so then there's just another life after that, and another life after that, and another life after that. And sooner or later, you actually start forgetting to do good things, forgetting to accumulate good karma. And in fact, you start cultivating bad karma. In fact, you might even be doing that in this life. So actually, most people are cultivating a mixture of good karma and bad karma. So yeah, you might cultivate a bunch of good karma in this life and have really nice conditions in your next life. And that will run out. Sooner or later, that will run out, and you'll start forgetting to do good things and slipping into bad habits. And then you'll wind up cultivating a lot of bad karma and getting the results of bad karma. So it doesn't amount to very much in the end. Or similarly, you might do some meditation in this life and make your mind a little bit more stable and a little bit more peaceful. But then in your next life, you forget about meditation entirely. You don't have any interest in meditation. So you wind up getting wrapped up in pursuit of material wealth, or pursuit of having children, or possessions, or achievements, or fame, or all these other pointless things. And then you wind up just being a depressed old person who's reflecting on the hollowness and meaninglessness of their life. Wind up dying and moving on to somewhere else and still not being happy. So if Buddhism was just about being a little bit happier for a little while, and again, I would say it's not really worth it. It's just one of countless ways to be a little bit happier. And if you like it, then that's okay. It's fine. If you like this as a way of being a little bit happier, it's okay. I don't blame you. It's fine. But it's important to remember that Buddhism is about something far more sublime, far more transcendent. Buddhism is about cultivating this clear, direct vision, this clear, direct understanding of the ultimate nature of all phenomena, the ultimate nature of all reality. And we do so because this is the way of developing ultimate compassion. So we practice Buddhism out of ultimate compassion for ourselves, because we generally want ourselves to be perfectly happy, completely free of suffering, and also because we want others to be perfectly happy, perfectly free of suffering. And we cultivate wisdom because it's through clearly knowing and understanding the nature of reality that we're able to go beyond all suffering, that we're able to let go of all the causes of suffering in the mind, both for ourselves and for others. So ultimately then, it's this question. With everything that we do, the question is this leading me towards complete awakening? Is this pointing in the direction of complete awakening? Is this pointing in the direction of letting go of all greed, hatred, and delusion? Is this pointing in the direction of a clear perception of the impermanent, unsatisfying, and impersonal nature of all phenomena? A clear perception of the emptiness of all phenomena? Am I practicing in a way that is cultivating the boundless compassion, which also contributes to the development of perfect wisdom? Am I practicing in a way which is ultimately the relinquishment of self-centeredness, which again is synonymous with both the cultivation of compassion and the cultivation of wisdom? The highest wisdom of Buddhism is that everything is ultimately impersonal, ultimately empty of any self-nature. And so the practice of compassion is the relinquishment of self-centeredness, and the practice of wisdom is the relinquishment of self-centeredness. Ultimately, it's exactly the same thing, inseparable. And so one is able then to finally achieve the recognition that although there are countless objects, there is also objectlessness. Although there are countless activities, there is also stillness. Yet that stillness is not rigid. That stillness is expressed through all this motion, all this activity, all these objects. All of these are possible because of that underlying stillness. So also recognizing the inseparability of the conditioned and the unconditioned. Recognizing that what we're ultimately recognizing is the bedrock of reality. What we're ultimately recognizing is the fundamental ground for all things. So this foundational formlessness, which again, we talk about it in different ways, but the way that it's commonly talked about in the Theravada school is the element of the unconditioned. So asankata dhatu. So fundamental nature, fundamental aspect of reality. So a dhatu is a basic aspect of reality. So normally we're fixated on all the objects and things, and we completely miss the objectlessness that lies behind all things. So because we're so wrapped up in the things and we take them so seriously, then the mind gets attached to them. It gets attracted to certain things and repulsed by other things, and constantly lost in preferences and liking and disliking and wanting this and rejecting that. But the mind of an awakened being is that they recognize that everything has its place. Everything has its place, so everything completely belongs. And yet, ultimately, nothing is worth clinging to because everything is impermanent. The moment you turn your attention towards something, it's already gone. It's already changed. So the mind of an awakened being doesn't reject anything, but it also doesn't cling to anything. It doesn't grab anything. It sees what passes in front of it as something which has its place, but which is ultimately meaningless, ultimately insignificant, ultimately impermanent, and therefore not worth latching onto. So this is a cultivation of equanimity, a mind which is unshakable, because it's recognized the fundamental impermanence and emptiness of any phenomenon that appears before it. Therefore, it doesn't react to any phenomenon, either with grasping or rejecting. Yet there's still this deep understanding that there is dukkha, there is suffering in the world. So this is a critical understanding. So an awakened being still knows that there is dukkha. Although they are no longer touched by it, they still know that dukkha is there. And there's still this natural impulse to alleviate the suffering of others. So when one sees dukkha, and one knows clearly what causes dukkha, when one knows clearly that the cessation of dukkha is possible, then it's natural to show that to others. It's natural to demonstrate it to others. So of course, there's differences in the teaching capabilities of awakened beings, but they all have in common this basic compassion, this basic impulse to help others attain awakening, to help others attain freedom from suffering. And ultimately, once again, it's important to remember that this is what Buddhism is about. It's about ultimate, absolute, complete happiness, ultimate, absolute, complete freedom from suffering. So not just a temporary slight increase in our happiness quantity, but complete, absolute, permanent happiness, complete, absolute, permanent freedom from suffering. And this is through recognizing the only thing which cannot be defined as impermanent. It's through recognizing the only thing which cannot be defined as suffering, as unsatisfying. And this is the asankata dhatu, the Nibbāna dhatu, so the element of the unconditioned, the Nibbāna element, this basic underlying aspect of reality, which we normally miss because we're so fixated on objects, on things, that we miss the thinglessness, the objectlessness, which underlies all phenomena. So we can start to turn our attention towards that underlying objectlessness through developing the perception of impermanence. Through recognizing impermanence, one then starts to relinquish one's grip on individual phenomena, because you see that they're all transient, they're constantly changing. And as you pay closer attention, you start to recognize that the arising and ceasing of phenomena is simultaneous. That phenomena are, as Zen Master Myo said, the phenomena are partially real. They're only partially real. So in the sense that they can seem real, but they're not ultimately absolutely real. They're appearances. So they're real as appearances, but when you pay closer attention, you recognize that they're transient. There's nothing solid or substantial there. So in recognizing the impermanence of phenomena, one can start to become more clearly aware of the emptiness of phenomena, the fundamental insubstantiality of phenomena, the lack of substance to all things. And it's recognizing that underlying insubstantiality that one starts to become aware of the element of the unconditioned, so that which cannot be defined in terms of other things. So as I mentioned before, any object is defined in terms of its relationship to other objects. So what is it that defines a monk? Well, then you have to define what isn't a monk. Well, what is a monk? Well, you have to list a bunch of other words, which then also need to be defined in terms of other words, which need to be defined in terms of other words. And you eventually wind up dragging in an entire dictionary. So this is what we recognize. We recognize that whenever we get caught up in any object, then we're lost in the whole world of objects. And it becomes difficult to recognize the underlying objectlessness. But when one sees all objects as impermanent, then it's possible to relax. Relax the mind's constant latching onto objects and become aware of that underlying formlessness, that pervasive formlessness. And this is a practice of renunciation, of letting go. So we talk a lot about letting go in Buddhism. And one of the practices of letting go is letting go of the perception of solid objects, letting go of the perception of substantial, persistent objects. And ultimately, one also lets go of the perception of a substantial, persistent self, which is what we call anatta sanya. So anicca sanya, anatta sanya, these are all directly related to sunyata sanya. So the recognition of impermanence, the recognition of the impersonal nature of all things, naturally leads to a recognition of the fundamental emptiness of all things, the underlying insubstantiality of all things. And then one then recognizes that also everything that one thinks of as me or mine is ultimately insubstantial. It's ultimately empty. It's ultimately not quite real. One can let it melt back into that underlying formlessness. So allowing it to cease. So allowing it to cease doesn't mean forcing it to stop existing, but rather it means allowing it to pass in and out of existence, allowing it to stop being an immediate experience. And this is a recognition then of the deep peace that is possible through Buddhist practice. And one can then start to incorporate that peacefulness into one's daily life. So the underlying awareness of emptiness, the underlying awareness of the formlessness or the unconditioned element of reality, it makes it easier to take the trials and tribulations of daily life in stride. We take the difficulties of daily life with a sense of lightness and ease, a sense of humor and relaxation. We don't take everything so seriously anymore because we recognize that ultimately it's all empty. It's all insubstantial. There's not really anything here which can stick to us, and there also isn't any us for anything to stick to. From one perspective, it's all a bunch of interrelated objects popping in and out of existence. But from another perspective, there's nothing here whatsoever. There's nothing at all. It's just seemings, appearances, like ghosts passing in the night. There's not really anything here that's worth making a big deal about. And yet, nonetheless, we also recognize how when one mistakes the insubstantial as substantial, when one mistakes the impersonal as personal, when one mistakes the impermanent as permanent, then naturally one experiences a whole lot of suffering. So we see the tendency in our own minds, the tendency to solidify that which is not solid, and therefore to suffer tremendously. The tendency to believe our own stories. We tell ourselves these stories of this poor person who's suffering so much. Well, the story is utter nonsense. There is no person and there is no suffering, so drop the story. The story is ridiculous. And the moment you drop the story, you realize you just dropped your suffering as well. It's only when we're telling the story of the person who's suffering that we experience suffering. When we drop the story of the person who suffers, then there is no suffering. So we look at the stories that we tell ourselves and we recognize that those stories themselves are just conditional phenomena which are dependent upon our constant participation in those stories, our constant creating of those stories. And when we drop those stories, then we drop our suffering. And it all melts back into this infinite vastness of formlessness, the unlimited asankata dhatu, the unlimited element of the unconditioned, the unlimited element of Nibbāna. So the ultimate goal of Buddhist practice is this immediate accessibility of complete serenity, complete contentment, complete joy. So again, it's no small thing to invite monks to spend Vassa where you are. It's actually a really big thing because this is the gateway to the deathless. It's the gateway to infinite happiness. It's the gateway to the complete cessation of suffering. It's the gateway to the perfection of wisdom and compassion. So I encourage you, if you have monks who live nearby you, constantly re-invite them to spend Vassa. If you don't have monks nearby you, reach out to some and ask them to come and spend Vassa near you. Create the conditions for monks to come and set up near you. And take the opportunity to dive deeper and deeper into the Buddha's teachings, incorporating them more and more fully into your life until you also start to get a glimpse of the unconditioned. You start to get a glimpse of the vast, spacious peacefulness, which is accessible in every moment, no matter what's going on, no matter what seems to be going on. That vast, limitless peacefulness in Nibbāna is always accessible if we cultivate the mind in the proper way. I think that's all I really have to say for this evening. So a few thoughts on Buddhism for your consideration. So at this time, if you have any questions, I'll answer whatever questions you have. So we can conclude the Dhamma talk with 3 sadhus. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. And I'll take whatever questions you might have. So I see a few people checking in. So hello to Elaine, Karen, Anna Maria, Ronald, Jayanta, Elia, Henry, Mary, Jess, and Yankee. Welcome to all of you. And I see a couple questions. So Henry asks, what's the difference between Nibbāna and unconditioned bare awareness, non-dual awareness, resting in one's own awareness? So I probably need more description on what you mean by bare awareness. I've heard this term a few times. It's, for one thing, it's not a term that you'll find anywhere in the suttas. So I've seen it used a few times, but also defined differently in different places. So it's important to define what you mean by this term in order for me to give a more clear explanation. The term non-dual awareness, again, needs a bit more clear definition. The term non-dual awareness is, non-dualism is one way of talking about Nibbāna. It's one way of talking about the asankata dhatu, because in duality is only possible in the world of sankharas, the world of conditional phenomena. The asankata dhatu is by its very nature non-dual. And Nibbāna, again, by its very nature, is non-dual. But then one is setting up a duality there as well. So in the Zen school, there's the saying, not two, not one, which means don't get stuck either in duality or in non-duality, recognizing rather that these are inseparable, and one automatically implies the other, so they can't be pulled apart. As for resting in one's own awareness, there's a real danger here So first off, identifying awareness as one's own is already implying a certain sense of self-identity, which can be problematic. If you're identifying I am awareness, then that's actually a self-identity, which is an obstacle to awakening. Actually, if you think I am awareness, then you can't even become a stream enterer, let alone anything beyond that. And also, resting in awareness is not sufficient. That's just mindfulness. So mindfulness is great, but it's only the first of the 7 factors of awakening. And it's only one of the 8 parts of the Eightfold Path. So resting in one's own awareness might simply be a way of wasting time. It's not necessarily a practice which leads to awakening. It may just be a way of passing time. So again, it's necessary to more clearly define what you mean by these terms. So in Buddhist practice, we're not practicing mere quietism, but we're trying to cultivate the wisdom which clearly recognizes defilement and purity, the mind which clearly recognizes both the unwholesome and the wholesome, the mind which clearly recognizes attachment and non-attachment, the mind which clearly recognizes self-identity and also the relinquishment of self-identity. And there is also the activity, the conscious impulse of the mind towards relinquishment, towards relinquishing self-identity, towards letting go of all phenomena, letting go of all things. So it's not something which just happens automatically by resting in awareness, but it's something which actually does take a certain deliberate effort on one's part. Again, I'm not 100% sure that I'm answering your question clearly because I'm not quite sure what you mean by the words that you're choosing, but hopefully this helped a bit. If not, you can ask a follow-up question and I'll try to clarify further. Elia says, can you dig deeper in no self, please? Yeah, and I could talk for hours on the topic because ultimately when we talk about anatta, so non-self, when we talk about anatta, you wind up talking about all of Buddhism because actually this is the unique aspect of Buddhism, is the teaching of anatta. And ultimately this is what makes Buddhism Buddhism. If you take out anatta, then there's no Buddhism. There's just quietism, as I mentioned earlier. It's not really anything significant. So anatta is ultimately it's saying that nothing whatsoever is personal. That everything that is going on is natural unfolding of cause and effect, and none of it's personal. It's not about you, and also whatever you think is you is just another impermanent, transient, insubstantial phenomenon. Therefore, it's not who you ultimately are. And in fact, nothing whatsoever can be found, which is ultimately you. So one way to relate to this is to go through all the components of your body and mind and check to see, what do I think is me? So am I these glasses? Are these glasses me? No, clearly not. This robe, is this robe me? No, clearly not. How about this skin? Is this skin me? Well, no, because the skin is constantly disintegrating and flaking off and being replaced. So clearly the skin is not me either. The saliva, is the saliva me? Well, no, clearly not. Again, constantly coming and going. If I spit it out, then it's clearly not me. But even when it's inside the body, it's clearly not me. It's just some water coming and going. And the mind. So you look at the thoughts and emotions. Well, are those me? No, they're just temporary things which come and go. So maybe right now there's a feeling of greed in the mind. So you stick me, like I am greed. But then you wait a few seconds and the greed has disappeared and now there's irritation in the mind. So clearly greed is not me because it's gone. Or maybe you notice that you get irritated a lot. So then you do a bunch of metta meditation and the habit for irritation disappears. So clearly the habit of irritation is not me either. You think I am young, but you wait a while and you're old. So clearly young is not me either. So in this way, you go through everything that you think is me, and you realize that none of it is actually me. It's all just temporary conditions, which do not define who and what we are. And ultimately, you cannot find anything whatsoever which defines you. Therefore, any self-identity that we have is fundamentally meaningless, not ultimately true. So we can temporarily use self-identities when they're helpful, but it's necessary to understand that they're ultimately untrue. And when we do so, then we recognize also that all self-identities are fundamentally a cause of suffering. And that when we relinquish self-identity, all our suffering evaporates. Again, this is the highest teaching of the Buddhas. So there's a little bit more on no self. Again, it's a very deep and complex topic, but this is a very brief summary of the subject. And Jess says, unfortunately, I don't have a Sangha near me. Well, I'm sorry to hear that. So you have two options. One is to find out where Buddhist monasteries are located and go move to live close by a Buddhist monastery. Or, as I mentioned earlier, reach out to some monks and invite them to come spend Vassa near where you live. Again, that necessitates providing a place for them to live and making sure their needs are taken care of for the Vassa. So that's for 3 months, mid-July to mid-October. That's another option that you can have. In the meantime, you can keep joining in with all the online offerings. These days, there's so many bhikkhus and bhikkhunis who give Dhamma talks online and have online communities of one sort or another. So that's another way you can be connected with Sangha. And Elias says, difficult to practice equanimity when, for instance, in a lot of pain. Yes, it's difficult. That's true. Do it anyway, because the only other option is to wallow in misery. So options, try to practice equanimity, difficult but worthwhile, or hopelessly wallow in misery. Not a difficult choice. So one is resigning yourself to hopelessness, and the other is trying to do something that is difficult but worthwhile, and which ultimately results in genuine happiness. Not a difficult choice. So Buddhism is a difficult practice sometimes. Sometimes it's actually quite easy, but sometimes the practice can be difficult. But it's always the most worthwhile practice. It's always worth trying to do. And Facebook user, I don't know why sometimes Facebook users come up as anonymous in this way, but it happens sometimes. Says, how does it feel when you experience Nibbāna even for a moment? Is it something like feeling freedom from all worries? Well, I'm going to give you a brief and unsatisfying answer, which is cultivate the perception of impermanence, practice letting go of all phenomena, and you will find out for yourself what Nibbāna feels like. Freedom from all worries, that's definitely a component. That is definitely a component of Nibbāna, yes. Robert says, I find the watcher, that which makes decisions, that which can direct thoughts or make decisions, is hard to not identify with. True. Can you speak about this in particular? Yes, so it's true. Usually when one starts to cultivate the practices of anicca sanya, anatta sanya, so the recognition of impermanence and non-self, usually one starts to recognize that the body clearly can't be who we ultimately are. And then we look at the mind and the surface level of the mind, so the thoughts and emotions on the surface of the mind, we're like, oh, that clearly can't be who we are either. But then you look a little bit deeper and you find what you call the watcher. So this is awareness or consciousness itself. And this is where we tend to get stuck, because that seems to be something which is relatively stable, seems to be relatively permanent, seems to be relatively persistent. But is it? Now, this is a little bit difficult, because whenever you're paying attention, that means attention is present. Whenever you're aware, that means awareness is present. Whenever you're conscious of something, that means consciousness is present. So this is part of what creates the illusion that awareness is persistent, is because whenever you're aware enough to pay attention to awareness, then awareness is present. And whenever you're not aware enough to pay attention to awareness, then you're not aware that awareness isn't present. So this makes it a little bit more challenging, doesn't it? But when you reflect, you're like, well, but has awareness been present permanently, eternally, constantly, and unchangingly? You start looking at your memories and you're like, actually, no, I spaced out. I spaced out actually just a few seconds ago. During these long, boring speeches by this monk, I spaced out for a few seconds. Actually, I spaced out repeatedly during the entire Dhamma talk. Oh, wow, maybe awareness isn't so permanent after all. And you're like, well, and even when I'm aware, sometimes that awareness is very strong and sharp and clear. And other times that awareness is kind of muddy and vague. So even when awareness is present, it's not always stable. And it's not always the same. It's constantly changing. So it's sometimes there, sometimes not there. And even when it's there, it's always shifting and changing. It's always different. It's never quite the same. So that means, just like everything else, it's impermanent and subject to arising and ceasing, sometimes present, sometimes not present. Therefore, it can't possibly be me. It's just another sankhara, just another temporary, conditional, impermanent, transient, empty, apparent phenomenon, just like everything else. No different from saliva. No different from sweat. No different from emotions. No different from thoughts. No different from sound. No different from anything else. Just another transient, insubstantial, empty, impersonal, apparent phenomenon, just like everything else. As for you say that which makes decisions. Now that's very interesting, because you assume there is something that makes decisions. What a fascinating assumption. So what do we actually know? What do we think we know anyway? We think we know that decisions exist. Okay, fair enough. There are sankharas, which we call decision. Okay, fair enough. We think there is a process called decision making. Okay, fair enough. There is a sankhara, which we call decision making. Okay, fair enough. But what on earth are we calling a person who makes decisions? That which makes decisions, one who makes decisions. Where are we sticking that label? Where is this person, the one who makes decisions? Where are they? Try to find this person. I can't find them anywhere, but maybe you'll have better luck than me. Or maybe in the process of searching, you might find something. So Jess, in response to my earlier answer, said, I don't have those options, and said, what can I do when I can't go to a sangha? I called each one, but they are 4 hours away and I don't drive. One takes 4 hours, but they only have an email address, but no phone. I didn't get email. Yeah, it's difficult when your mobility is limited. It's difficult. So you do the best you can with the situations that you have. So today you joined in with a Dhamma live stream program. That's good. Again, there's lots. There's so many monks on the internet these days that you could spend hours and hours every day just participating in Dhamma live streams, which is actually a great way to spend your time. So I really encourage you to make the most of it. It's really wonderful how many live stream Dhamma programs there are these days. The internet's awash with them. So make the most of it. Create a schedule for yourself. So every day you do chanting and meditation. Actually, there's a lot of monasteries which live stream their chanting as well. So you can even join in their chanting remotely if you wish to. So make your own schedule of chanting and meditation every day. Chanting, meditation, sutta study, Dhamma talks. Take the precepts, follow the 5 precepts every day. Look to see what you can do in your life to practice generosity and charity for the people that you know, the people that you encounter. Practice kindness and generosity for everyone that you encounter. So do the best you can to practice with the conditions that you have. And again, explore how you can get closer to monasteries. Maybe right now it seems like you don't have any way to, but remain open to possibilities. And you may find something becomes available to you. But in the meantime, do the best you can in the way that I've described. And Facebook user says, if there is awareness on impermanence, but still, since you are attached to your children, it's not hard to let go and allow them to stay away for longer periods of time. How do I tackle this and make mind calm? Here's a thought. So I remember many years ago when I was living at Abhayagiri, the abbot, my teacher, Ajahn Pasanno, he had been away traveling for several weeks. And he came back to the monastery, and of course we all were delighted to see him, and we were having a conversation with him. And one of the monks asked him, he was like, "Oh, Ajahn, when you're gone, do you think about us?" And he said, "No." And the monk was kind of surprised, and he was like, "Not at all? Like, you don't think about us at all?" And my teacher was like, "Yeah, no, not at all." So that's my recommendation. Don't think about them. Then there's no problem. It's only when you're continuously rolling around these thoughts and stories in your mind and obsessing with these stories about your children and where are they and what are they doing and what's going on and da-da-da-da-da, that's when you suffer. But in reality, when they're off away doing their own thing, well, then just don't think about them. Then there's no problem. And that's the last question that I see online. So if there's no other questions, then we can go ahead and end the session. And I see Kamron, is that Ajahn Kamron joining in? If so, good to see you, Ajahn. Always lovely to connect with you. And then we have someone called Dalai Lama's Tea, who says, how do you handle negative people? By remaining positive. That's really the only way. So cultivate as much loving kindness, compassion, and equanimity within yourself. So cultivate as much positivity as you can within yourself. And then the negativity of others will not affect you. That's the only way. And that's the last of the questions. So I think we can go ahead and end it this time. So we'll conclude the session with 3 sadhus. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. And we'll see you next time.